The entry is dated the 18th of February, 1872. It runs to 11 lines in a small leather pocket diary belonging to a Cleveland refiner named Robert Hanna. He is 43 years old. He owns, with his partner, the second largest oil refining operation in the city. He has, that morning, returned from a meeting at the offices of Standard Oil on Pearl Street. He sits down at his desk. He picks up a pen. He writes, and I am reading the entry now in his own words, as it was preserved by his family, and as it surfaced in the Tarbell investigation 32 years later. He writes this: Met with Rockefeller this morning. He showed me a paper, a contract between the Standard Oil Company and the railroads. He said the railroads have agreed to charge me twice the freight rate they charge him. He said I cannot match his price at any market east of Pittsburgh. He said the same arrangement now applies to every refiner in Cleveland, except those who have already sold to him.
He said I have 10 days to decide. I do not see how we can refuse. I do not see how anyone in this city can refuse. May God forgive us all for what is about to happen. Robert Hanna sold his refinery to Standard Oil 8 days later, for 30 cents on the dollar of its book value. He was one of 22 refiners in Cleveland who signed in the next 6 weeks. The diary survived. The refinery did not. What you have just heard is, in the historical record, the closest thing that exists to a confession written in real time by a man being economically destroyed. There are not many such documents. The losers in capitalism rarely keep diaries, and when they do, they rarely preserve the entries that describe their own defeat. This one survived because Hannah's daughter, in 1903, gave the volume to Ida Tarbell, who quoted it in the original McClure series, and who deposited the diary, after her death, in the Drakewell Museum in Titusville, Pennsylvania, where it can still be read on request. Today's video is about the document, and about the system the document describes, and about why the system has never gone away, only changed its costume. The meeting on the 18th of February, 1872, takes place in a small office on the 3rd floor of a brick building at the corner of Pearl and Superior Streets in Cleveland. The room is heated by a coal stove. There is a single window facing east. The clerk who keeps the appointment book has noted that Mr. Hanna arrived at 9 in the morning and was shown directly in without waiting. This is itself unusual. Most callers wait at least 20 minutes. The unusual courtesy is, in retrospect, the first thing Hanna ought to have understood.
Rockefeller is 20 minutes more polite to men he is about to ruin than to men he is about to do business with. The office is plain. There is a roll-top desk. There are 2 leather chairs. There is a low bookshelf containing ledgers and bound volumes of railroad tariffs. There is no decoration on the walls. The man behind the desk is 32 years old. He has thinning, sandy hair, a long jaw, and pale blue eyes that do not move when he speaks. He stands when Hanna enters, shakes his hand, gestures to the chair, and sits down again. He does not smile. He does not, contrary to later legend, make threats. He does not raise his voice. He never raises his voice. The men who worked beside him for 40 years remarked that they could not recall a single occasion on which they had heard him speak above the volume of normal conversation. He has in his hand a single sheet of paper.
He places it on the desk between them, turns it so that Hanna can read it, and says, in a voice that one of his junior partners later described as the voice of a country doctor delivering a diagnosis to a man he had known since childhood. He says, "Robert, I want you to see this before we talk." The paper is a tariff schedule. It is signed by representatives of 3 railroads, the New York Central, the Erie, and the Pennsylvania. It establishes 2 rates for the shipment of refined petroleum from Cleveland to the eastern seaboard. The first rate, applicable to the South Improvement Company and its members, is $1.30 per barrel. The second rate, applicable to all other shippers, is $2.56 per barrel. Hanna reads it. He reads it again. He understands before he has finished the second reading that his business has already ended. The signatures on the document were applied 2 weeks ago.
The arrangement has been in effect,
Secretly, since the 1st of February. He sets the paper down. He looks at the man across the desk. The man across the desk looks back at him with the same blank, patient courtesy with which he received him at the door. Rockefeller says one further sentence in the meeting by Hanna's account. He says, "I would prefer to buy your refinery rather than to compete with it." He names a number. The number is 30 cents on the dollar. He says Hanna has 10 days. He stands. The meeting is over. It has lasted 11 minutes. Hanna walks down 3 flights of stairs into Pearl Street. He walks 4 blocks home in the February cold without his overcoat buttoned. He sits down at his desk. He writes the entry that I read to you in the cold open. To understand why Hanna had no choice, you have to understand the document itself. The document is the South Improvement Company contract.
It is, by any honest measure, the single most consequential private agreement ever signed in the 19th century American economy. The arrangement worked as follows. In the autumn of 1871, Rockefeller and a small group of refiners, none of whom were the largest in the country, but all of whom had the discipline to act in concert, approached the 3 trunk-line railroads connecting the Pennsylvania oil fields to the East Coast. The proposal was structured in 3 layers, each one more aggressive than the last. The first layer was a high published tariff. Every shipper of refined petroleum would be quoted the same rate, $2.56 per barrel from Cleveland to New York. There would be no public discrimination. The railroads could announce truthfully that they treated all shippers alike. The second layer was a secret rebate. The members of the South Improvement Company would, in addition to paying the published rate, receive a kickback of roughly 50% on their own shipments. Their effective rate was therefore $1.30, while the public rate remained $2.56. The third layer, and this is the one that defies belief, even now when one reads the surviving contracts, was a drawback. The members of the South Improvement Company would receive, on every barrel shipped by a non-member, a kickback of approximately $1. The railroads, in other words, would pay Rockefeller and his partners a sum equal to roughly 40% of the freight rate on the shipments of every competitor they had. The competitors did not know about this. They were paying the published rate. The railroads were taking their money and quietly handing nearly half of it to the men who were trying to destroy them. A refiner in Cleveland who tried to compete with Standard Oil under this arrangement was, without his knowledge, financing Standard Oil's victory over him. Every barrel he shipped enriched the company that was about to absorb him. When the arrangement was discovered in late February of 1872, leaked by a railroad clerk who could not believe what he was being asked to copy, the public reaction was incandescent. The Pennsylvania legislature revoked the South Improvement Company's charter within 60 days. The railroads, under public pressure, formally canceled the agreement. The contract as a legal document ceased to exist. It did not matter. By the time the public learned of the arrangement, 22 of Cleveland's 26 refineries had already been absorbed by Standard Oil. The document had done its work in the 6 weeks between its signing and its discovery, and the work, once done, could not be undone. The map of American refining had been redrawn permanently by a piece of paper that was technically illegal and operationally devastating. Let us extract the mechanism, because the mechanism is what matters. The South Improvement Company contract was an instance of a more general structure that recurs throughout the history of large fortunes. The structure has 3 components.
When all three are present, the resulting position is so asymmetric that competitors do not so much lose as collapse, quickly, quietly, and without the ability to articulate publicly what has happened to them. First component: a two-tiered pricing system in which one tier is visible and the other is invisible. The visible tier is offered ostentatiously to everyone on equal terms. The invisible tier is offered only to a small group of insiders. The arithmetic of the invisible tier is severe enough that no one outside the group can compete on price in any market the group chooses to enter.
Importantly, the visible tier exists for public consumption. It is the answer the railroad will give if a journalist asks how it treats its shippers. The answer is true. It is also irrelevant. Second component: a tax on outsiders that is collected by insiders. This is the truly distinctive feature of the South Improvement arrangement, and the feature that makes it qualitatively different from a merely large discount. The outsider is not simply at a disadvantage. The outsider is, by paying the published rate, actively subsidizing the insider who is destroying him. Each barrel shipped by Hanna's refinery in February of 1872 was a small wire transfer to John D. Rockefeller, sent by Robert Hanna in good faith in payment for transportation services rendered. The geometry is psychologically intolerable to the outsider once he understands it, but by the time he understands it, his cash position has already eroded past the point of recovery. Third component: information asymmetry sustained by silence. The arrangement does not need to be lawful. It needs to be unknown. The South Improvement Company members signed papers committing themselves to secrecy. The railroad executives who signed the rebate schedules destroyed the cover sheets and kept only the schedules themselves filed in locked cabinets. The clerk who eventually leaked the documents did so because he could no longer bear what he was being asked to do. He was fired within a week. He never worked in the railroad industry again. When you see these three components in combination, invisible pricing, an outsider tax, and protected silence, you are looking at a position that will compound returns at rates that no competitor can match. The competitor will exhaust himself trying to operate efficiently. The insider will simply collect the difference. The insider does not need to be smarter. He does not need to be faster. He needs only to be on the right side of an arrangement that the competitor does not know exists. There is, of course, a defense of what Rockefeller did, and it has been made repeatedly, and it deserves to be heard rather than dismissed. The defense, in its most articulate form, runs as follows. The American oil industry in the 1860s and early 1870s was chaotic, wasteful, and structurally unstable. Hundreds of small refineries operated at 20 or 30% of capacity. Crude prices oscillated between $2 and $10 a barrel within single seasons. Workers were laid off and rehired in cycles measured in weeks. Refined kerosene reached consumers contaminated, misgraded, and dangerous. House fires from adulterated lamp oil were a leading cause of urban death in American cities. The system, the defense says, was failing the public, the producers, and the workers alike. Someone was going to consolidate it. The question was not whether consolidation would occur. The question was who would conduct it, and how. Rockefeller conducted it with discipline, precision, and a long-term view that almost no one else in the industry possessed. He did not destroy his competitors arbitrarily. He bought most of them, at prices that, while below book value, were paid in Standard Oil shares, and those shares appreciated by factors of 50 and more over the next 30 years. Many of the Cleveland refiners who signed in 1872 retired wealthy, their original purchase prices having compounded into fortunes their independent businesses could never have produced. The men who refused to sell, like Hanna, who eventually did sell, but who fought longer, did not, in fact, do worse than they would have done otherwise. They did worse than the ones who accepted the share exchange and held.
The defense also points out correctly that Rockefeller standardized the product. Kerosene, refined to the standard oil specification, was, by 1880, safe. House fires from lamp oil declined by 90% over a generation. The price of light fell from 20 cents per gallon to 7. A workman who could not afford to read after dark in 1865 could, by 1890, read every evening for an hour for the price of a single penny. This is a real public good. It is the result, directly, of the integration that the South Improvement Company contract made possible. But, and this is where the counterview turns back on itself, the question is not whether good outcomes followed. They did. The question is whether the means by which those outcomes were produced should be available to anyone who can construct the means. The mechanism Rockefeller demonstrated in 1872 is not specific to oil. It is, as I described in the previous block, a general structure.
If the structure is morally legitimate when it produces cheaper kerosene, it is also morally legitimate when it produces cheaper labor, cheaper credit, cheaper data, and concentrates the resulting surplus in the hands of whoever can occupy the position. The world that follows from accepting the structure is a world in which competition is theatrical, and the real distribution of wealth is decided in rooms like the third-floor office at Pearl and Superior. Whether that is the world you wish to live in is, in the end, the entire argument. Now look at our own century and ask yourself where this same mechanism operates today, in cleaner suits and with better lawyers. In 2013, a man named Edward Snowden left a job at a contractor for the National Security Agency carrying a hard drive containing internal documents. Among the documents were descriptions of a program called PRISM. PRISM was an arrangement between the agency and a small number of large American technology companies, Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Apple, and others, that permitted the agency, on the basis of secret court orders, to obtain user data from the company's servers under terms the public was not informed of. The companies signed contracts. The contracts were secret. The terms were not the same for all participants. Smaller technology companies, the documents indicated, received no such requests because their data was not considered sufficiently valuable. The arrangement, in structural terms, was indistinguishable from the South Improvement Company contract. A two-tiered system, an outsider tax, in this case paid not in dollars, but in privacy by the users of every service whose company had signed. And protected silence, enforced this time by federal law. In 2019, an antitrust investigation by the European Union revealed that Amazon had been operating a similar two-tiered structure within its marketplace. The published terms offered to third-party sellers on Amazon.com applied to all sellers equally. The actual operational reality applied differently. Amazon's own first-party listings received preferred algorithmic placement, lower fulfillment fees, and access to sales data that third-party competitors could not see. The third-party sellers paid Amazon a commission on every sale. Some of that commission was used, indirectly, to subsidize the operations of Amazon's own competing listings. Sellers were, in effect, financing the competitor that was learning their categories and replacing them. The European Commission found the arrangement actionable. Amazon settled without admitting wrongdoing. The structure continues in modified form today. In the credit card industry, the interchange fee paid by merchants to card networks is set in such a way that small merchants pay roughly twice the effective rate paid by the largest merchants. The largest merchants, Walmart, Amazon, Costco, negotiate private rates that are unknown to the small merchants competing in the same categories. Every cup of coffee sold by an independent cafe in your city carries an interchange burden that subsidizes, by a fraction of a cent, the operations of the corporate chain across the street. The geometry is identical to the 1872 rebate schedule. The names of the parties have changed.
The signatures are now in PDF files rather than ledgers. The pen Rockefeller used would not work on a touchscreen. The arrangement it was used to sign has been digitized, scaled, and made permanent. Return to the diary. Hanna's refinery, in February of 1872, had a book value of approximately $120,000.
He sold the Standard Oil for $36,000. The difference, $84,000, was, in effective terms, the price of his failure to know what document had been signed 2 weeks earlier in a room he had no access to. Adjusted for inflation, $84,1872 is approximately $2.5 million 2024 dollars. That is the per refinery cost of information asymmetry, measured in one transaction, in one city, in one 6-week window. There were 22 such transactions in Cleveland in that window. Multiply across the country, across the decade, across the industry. The arithmetic of what was transferred from the outsiders to the insiders during the consolidation of American petroleum between 1872 and 1882 has been variously estimated. The most careful reconstruction, by the economic historian Harold Williamson in 1959, places it at somewhere between $100 million and $150 million 1880 dollars.
That figure, in present-day terms, is roughly $5 billion. $5 billion transferred from the refiners who did not know the contract existed to the refiners who had signed it over the course of 10 years by means of a single mechanism applied repeatedly in different cities under different names. The diary entry I read to you at the beginning of this video records the precise moment one of those transfers occurred. It was written by a man holding a pen in February cold in a house he was about to lose, in a city whose entire refining sector was being absorbed around him. He did not know, could not know, that his small entry would become, decades later, a piece of evidence in the largest antitrust prosecution of the American century. He knew only that something had happened to him that he did not understand the architecture of. He wrote it down. The writing survived. And the architecture, for those who study it carefully, is still there.
There is one further detail in the diary that historians rarely quote
because it does not fit comfortably into either the prosecutorial or the defensive reading of the events. In the entry of the 26th of February, 8 days after the meeting on Pearl Street, and the day Hanna signed the sale to Standard Oil, he writes a single additional sentence below his record of the transaction. The sentence reads, "He was a gentleman to me throughout. I do not know what to make of this. Read that sentence carefully. It is not the language of a victim. It is the language of a man who has just had something done to him that does not have a name in the moral vocabulary he inherited. He cannot call it theft because the document was technically lawful at the moment it was signed. He cannot call it cruelty because the courtesy of the meeting was complete. He cannot call it competition because the competition was over before it began."
He is left, at the bottom of his last entry on the matter,
with a phrase that admits the full strangeness of the experience. "I do not know what to make of this." That sentence, more than any number, more than any biographer's verdict, is the closest the historical record comes to describing what it actually feels like to be on the wrong side of a position like the one Rockefeller held. It is not anger. It is bewilderment. The system has worked correctly. The rules have been observed. Something has happened that the rules do not contain a word for. You have lost. You cannot quite say to what. The diary sits in a temperature-controlled case at the Drake Well Museum in Titusville. Visitors can request to see it. Most do not. The page is open to a different entry, one from June of 1871, Before the meeting at Pearl and Superior, when Hanna believed he still had a future in the oil business. The page I described in the cold open is 2 volumes further in. It is rarely shown.
The paper is brittle. The ink has faded. The handwriting in that one entry is shakier than the entries before or after it. A small physical record of the hour in which the writer understood that his life was about to be rearranged by forces he could not name. Here is the question I want to leave you with. Somewhere right now, in some industry, in some city, in some sector you may or may not be inside of, a document is being drafted that has the same structure as the one that ended Robert Hanna's career. It is being drafted by people who are courteous, well-dressed, and do not raise their voices. The document creates a 2-tiered system. It taxes outsiders. It is protected by silence. Its existence will, in time, redraw the map of whatever industry it concerns. And the people on the wrong side of it will not know it exists until the consequences are already irreversible. The question is not whether such documents exist. They always exist. The question is whether you, in your own work, in your own field, have done the patient and unpleasant labor of finding out which side of the document you are on. Hanna found out on the 18th of February, 1872. He found out too late. When will you find out?